Test, test, test. Mr. Jones or Miss Scallion, or anybody on Zoom, do you want to raise your hand if you can hear us? Awesome, thank you. Ready. I bring the Assembly Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 6:01. This is February 26, 2024. Ms. Wall, will you please read the land acknowledgement?
We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous peoples of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We're grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunash Chish.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Ms. Edgerson.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Walaki Doc.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Hale.
Here.
And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda? See no changes. That agenda is approved. Ms. Wall, did you have a motion for the minutes?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move we approve the April 3rd, 2023 and the November 6th, 2023 Committee of the Whole minutes with the changes that are included in the updated packet here, and ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objection, those minutes are approved. We have a special order of business for public participation. Madam Mayor, do I ask Madam Clerk to read this, or how do we go about this? What's that? It's your preference. Thank you.
I would just say it's a sign-up sheet in the back, if anybody wants to speak.
There is a sign-up sheet in the back. We're going to have a special order of business, which is testimony on 3 ordinances. The ordinance 2023-14BAD, 2023-14BAB, and 2024-01BA. These are all first a loan and then 2 ordinances granting money, providing money to the school district. It's open for public testimony. Right now, we have 1 person signed up to testify. We are not discussing this at tonight's meeting, and we are not taking testimony on the actual decisions made by the school board. We are only taking testimony on the financial ordinances before us. So we have no one on Zoom. We have Mr. Neil Stickert signed up to testify, and anyone else that wants to testify, please sign up back there. Please go up to the chair. You need to press the button to turn that light green, state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Assembly. My name is Neil Stickert. I reside in the Mineral Valley, Juneau resident for the last 22 years. I've had 2 kids in the school system, K through 12. I'm just here to share my observations, if you weren't there last week, of the school board meeting. And these are from my perspective as a parent and citizen. The school board decision last week was made early in the morning, after midnight, after a 7-hour grueling meeting. Multiple members remarked they had not met or meaningfully discussed detailed aspects of the alternatives being considered. They've been working hard for a really long time under duress. Concurrently, real-time legislation to the BSA was being passed in the legislature that very night and considered in the House. One board member could barely emotionally regulate and was posturing to leave the meeting after a failed vote. Students, teachers, staff were present and tensions were high. As a result, the board made a decision under duress, and the public barely understands the trade-offs with respect to budget, staffing, transportation, student activities, instruction, access to facilities, and teacher and student morale. My sophomore at TM reported out to me today on the Hunger Games style impacts this decision's already having on the student body. Predictably, kids are classifying themselves on winning and losing sides. Rumors are flying on which teachers will displace their peers in a reduction in force. And speculation is rattling around without the benefit of information or a viable plan with community support behind it. So my request to you tonight is to withhold or make a condition of the FY25 CBJ funding that Juneau School District provide a comprehensive analysis of the structural changes being proposed to consolidating schools in our community. I do not believe this restructuring is ready by August without the tremendous impacts occurring to the student performance and morale in our community. Thank you for your time tonight, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Mr. Stickert. Are there any questions from members of the Assembly? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Stickert, did you hear, I did listen to the 7-hour meeting. I may have missed certain parts. There were some audio issues at times. Did you hear, or do you have a sense that there will be that type of plan emerging in the coming months, especially as they present their budget to the Assembly?
I'm sure there'll be every effort to make a plan. I just have concerns about the timing and the availability, the time available to do so, and then to vet each aspect of it across that spectrum of concerns and factors such as transportation, access to facilities, instruction quality, et cetera. So I think they're in a tremendously difficult position. But I think for the FY25 component of this support, I think we make it a requirement and then hold open some space to revisit this decision if at all possible.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Stickert.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions, or is there any further testimony on this item? Mr. Hauser, would you mind stepping up and just giving us a quick time frame of kind of where we are right now? Mr. Hauser is Superintendent Hauser, Superintendent of Schools. Just a quick time frame, thanks.
Through the mayor, to Deputy Mayor Hale, a quick overview of timeline just for the Assembly's understanding of the process. Last Thursday night, Friday morning, a vote was made by the board for reconsolidation and consolidation, reorganization of the facilities. Tomorrow, there is a special meeting of the board to talk about the FY24 and FY25 budget to start looking at kind of the next steps in preparation, looking at PTR, looking at kind of next steps in preparation for next year, not only the FY24, which of course the discussion about the ordinances will be brought up during the FY24 portion of the conversation tomorrow and the information provided, but also looking at some updated enrollment numbers, looking at PTR, looking at staffing assignments and other aspects of the FY25 budget at tomorrow's budget information meeting. The board's next meeting is scheduled on March 7th, which will be the first reading of the FY24 budget revision, as well as the FY25 budget. In addition to the reduction in force plan, those will be first readings. And then a second reading will take place for all those items on the March 12th school board regularly scheduled meeting. And so that's kind of a quick timeline of where the district's at right now in the process. We are going through and working with staff to put together the budget, put some of the pieces together that was just mentioned during the public testimony, working on the transition. We have students that are getting ready to register for classes, and so we're already putting together a combined course list for our students for classes going into next year, making sure that students have and see the opportunities that are going to be available for them as they're preparing for next school year and getting their courses selected. And so that's some of what we're working on the backside right now, trying to make sure that we get those pieces in place as well and coordinate. And obviously from a staffing perspective, we're working on that process, and that is going to be discussed within the next couple of weeks, that process that will be in place for staff going into next school year.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hauser.
Thank you.
I appreciate that update. And just a reminder to those on Zoom that the deadline for submitting testimony on this item was 4 p.m. today if you were going to submit by Zoom. However, I will remind everyone that this item will be on the agenda on March 4th, which is next Monday. That meeting is at 7 p.m. and we will hold a public hearing and take testimony both by Zoom and in person. And we will be voting on these ordinances at that time. So just a reminder to let people know that. And Superintendent Hauser, thank you very much for that update. That was very informative, and that's a lot to do in a very short time. Thank you. Moving on, Madam Manager, agenda topic 6.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. So you have in your packet a cover memo from me. You have a couple of draft ordinances, and then you have materials that were presented to the Docks and Harbors Board from City Manager Watt, and a draft response from the Docks and Harbors Board. I want to highlight that response, while included in multiple packets, was not officially passed by the board, but I think it had a lot of really good info in there, so I wanted to make sure and include it. With your permission, I'd like to just walk through the substantive sections of each ordinance and give the body an opportunity to answer questions.
Thank you. Actually, Madam Manager, that would be very helpful.
Great. I'll start on page 28, which is the ordinance establishing the duties of the tourism office. So what this ordinance does in essence is, of course, articulate that the tourism manager is in charge of public relations related to the cruise ship industry, including contract management, scheduling, coordination, and other duties as assigned by the manager. The substantive part of this resolution, or this ordinance, probably comes on, starts on line 19, which says that departments are expected to take direction from the tourism office when a project change in operation, policy, or similar action would likely alter or impact tourism management. And this really is to give the tourism manager, the manager's office, and the assembly through that chain of command a seat at the table when certain policies or projects impact tourism.
Madam Manager, if I might just ask, you're on page 29 of the packet, is that correct?
am, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Then I'll just go to the third section of that ordinance, which is on page 30. This is the meat and potatoes of the ordinance, which allows the manager to assign the tourism manager as the client department or co-project manager for any project with substantial relationship to cruise ship tourism. And I just want to explain a little bit logistically what that looks like. The client department and how we manage projects at CBJ, I'm most familiar with engineering, but of course the airport manages projects, docks and harbors manages projects. The project manager really is there to carry out the wishes of the client department. And so, you know, there'll be a lot of dialogue back and forth, but the project manager is the one in charge of approving designs, approving invoices, negotiating with contractors, issuing RFIs. So that relationship would still, in Docks and Harbors case, for example, you have a port engineer. That port engineer would still be responsible for all those duties, but making the tourism manager, either the client department or a co-project manager, would give that tourism manager a direct say in influencing the project. And so I just want to clarify that the intention here isn't to assign the tourism manager to, you know, be the lead on all the engineering nuts and bolts for a project, because of course we have engineers and project managers that do that very well. It's rather to make sure that they have a substantive seat at the table. If you want to ask, I can think of some projects where this would be, a good example is dock electrification is a great example. Improvements to the seawalk is another example where the tourism manager should have a really substantive seat at the table. So those are, the one thing I want to mention about changes to Title III and the tourism manager. While we're most familiar with docks and harbors and how the relationship between the tourism manager and docks and harbors, there's a lot of interplay there. This could apply to other departments. And an example that I bring up in my memo is Eagle Crest, right? Eagle Crest, as it expands into summer operations, has some nexus with the cruise industry. So that would be a project where we would want the tourism manager to have a seat at the table to be able to represent the kind of broader tourism community interests that the Assembly has. Happy to answer any questions on changes to Title III.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any questions? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Manager Kester, would this change the, for lack of a better phrase, the job description of what we would expect our tourism manager to do? I know that we didn't have everything lined up when we got Ms. Pierce, and at some point we might have to interview for another tourism director. How would this impact the job description, maybe, is I think what I'm trying to ask. Thank you.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, not having recently reviewed the job description, I really do think this is consistent with the intent of the tourism manager when the Assembly established a very high-level position in the manager's office with a lot of authority, right? The Assembly has given this position the authority to negotiate, the authority to speak on behalf of CBJ. So it is a high-level position within the manager's office. So, you know, I think that it kind of fulfills that original intent. And just like any position, you know, as you kind of work through it, you realize that that some changes need to be made. And so that's what we're bringing before you today.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. There's a lot here, so apologies for this question. I had a question about rate setting. Are we talking about that now, or am I out of order by asking a question on that?
Madam Manager, can we talk about that now?
The Assembly can talk about whatever they'd like. I do intend to go through changes to Title 85, which are specific to rate setting.
Super, thank you. I don't see any more questions. Are there additional questions? No. Please carry on. Your descriptions are very clear.
Thank you. So starting on page 31, you have the ordinance amending Chapter 85 related to docks and harbors. And I had an interesting conversation with City Manager Watt this morning, trying to get into his brain a little bit, a fascinating place, as you all know. And I talked to him about the intent of bringing forward these changes because, as you know, if you read the memo and you guys have been following this, he's been working on these for the last year of his time. And of course, you guys brought this up at your joint meeting. And, he pointed out that right now
Madam Manager, one moment. Madam Clerk, you did note that Madam Mayor has stepped aside for a moment, but carry on. Thank you.
One of his observations that I thought was really astute is that right now, the city is in the position of negotiating with itself on tourism-related issues. So before we can come to the Assembly with, problem solving, we have to start with docks and harbors. And not that it's not a friendly and cordial, but there are different motivations there, and it really makes it for inefficient and not always channeling the Assembly's direction. So I just thought that was a good way to kind of see the changes through that lens. So on page 31, the first change here, starting at line 24, is to really be explicit of the responsibilities of the Docks and Harbors Board, and that they're not responsible for docks and ferry terminals, but that they are still responsible for boat launch ramps and harbors. And also reinforce that they do their daily operations and maintenance of the facilities, including the docks, very well. So this section also clarifies that the Docks and Harbors Board would not be responsible for, which includes rate setting, scheduling, or policy issues affecting the cruise ship industry, or issues related to the interface between industry and citizens of Juneau, including the impact of tours. So I can pause there since I imagine there's some questions.
Ms. Wall, did you have a question on this section? Is this the right time to ask? Thank you.
I think so. But the manager can let me know if she's going to talk more about this later, and I can hold. But I'm curious about the rate setting. What this change would do to the rate setting process. My understanding is, right now Docks and Harbors proposes rate changes, and the Assembly gets to decide whether to approve those or send those back to Docks and Harbors to reconsider at a high level. I agree that that may not serve us given our goals. But I'm not sure what this change would mean in terms of a process moving forward, because I think both entities have a interest in the rates. And I'm sorry if I'm way ahead of this conversation.
It makes sense to me, Madam Manager.
No, I think that's an excellent question. So as you mentioned, right now,
And Madam Mayor is back now.
as you know, the rates are initiated by the Docks and Harbors and then brought to the Assembly. And so I'll just, I guess, talk about a recent example with rate setting that was a little bit of an example for administration of the communication kerfuffle, for lack of a better word. When Docks and Harbors brought forward the rate changes for harbors and docks, there was a 9% increase in dockage fees for cruise ships that the administration wasn't anticipating, because we've of course been engaging in negotiations with industry for increasing rates. So those Docks and Harbors Board consider those rate increases in the context of their other users and their other facilities, where we feel like they're really a special, it's a different facility, it's a different customer, and deserves a different process. And so that's an example of where there could have been better alignment if the roles and responsibilities would have been clear. So moving forward, the manager's office would initiate those rate setting conversations, and they would still be approved by the Assembly.
Ms. Wall.
And a follow-up, what role would docks and harbors have in that process?
Madam Manager.
I mean, I think it would be reasonable to assume a consultation with docks and harbors in that process, because of course, that is the entirety of the revenue for, not the entirety, but that is their revenue for docks, and it's very important to them. However, this ordinance doesn't mandate that, so if that's something that the Assembly wants to clarify, you could do that.
Thank you. Carry on.
The next section on page 32, line 4, is a manager's review of the docks and harbor budget. So right now, we, Robert and I, Deputy Manager Barr and I, sit down with all the department heads and review the budget and, ask questions and kind of compile what the manager's budget will present to you. Docks and harbors does not have that review process. And in speaking with Manager Watt, this was inserted into the draft language because the Docks and Harbor Board was really concerned that by taking away the authority for rate setting, their ability to perform their duties would be compromised. And so this section is intended to provide a manager review and then also provide mandate that the Assembly is notified of what any reductions in budget would have on what the operational impacts of any reductions in budget would be. So this both provides increased communication between the manager and docks and harbors, because as you know, you put your money where your mouth is, right? That's where a lot of the real policy is being implemented. But it also tries to care for that concern of the board of the budgetary impact of something that they don't have direct control over anymore.
Keep going. Thanks.
All right, so the next section that has changes is all the way on page 35, and that's line 14. And this section repeals limitation on authority, which basically says that the Docks and the Harbors Board cannot commit the city and borough to long-range port development or capital improvement planning unless directed by the Assembly by ordinance or resolution. And the reason why this is repealed is because just having that language in this section of code implies that the long-range port planning and the bigger capital planning projects are something that the Assembly would want the Docks and Harbors Board to work on. And the reality is the direction that, as I understand it, is really Assembly level conversation, that long-range planning. So this is, again, just to clarify that by removing it, it attempts to clarify that rule.
Carry on. Oh, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. So then, I guess, sorry, what city staff, if not what city staff would now do those things? The planning manager or the tourism manager, or anyway, who would do those things now?
So those would be as directed by the manager. I think that in the case of long-range port development planning, that would be the tourism manager.
Okay, and CIP would just be through engineering or something?
Well, notably, and this threw me for a loop too, notably, it's just long-term capital improvement planning, not capital projects. So you'll notice that there's a separate section of the ordinance, which is existing code, that authorizes docks and harbors, that's on page 33, line 23, that authorizes docks and harbors to manage all docks and harbors projects unless otherwise specified by the Assembly by resolution. So this doesn't remove the capital project management piece. It just specifies for the bigger picture planning. Seawalk planning is a great example, right? I mean, the Seawalk is this kind of very multi-departmental project. You've got Parks and Recreation, you have Docks and Harbors, you have tourism, and kind of wanting to make sure that type of planning that spans, it's greater than the impact on on one small project is headed up by the tourism manager.
Ms. Uscandies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just further refining that same question which you've addressed, your intent in removing this would be that the Docks and Harbors Board is no longer involved in any long-term planning. They're managing the operations or the project at the project level, but this would remove all long-term capital planning from that's your intent here.
Madam Manager.
Correct. And I wouldn't say that the Docks and Harbors would not be involved, but that they would not be the lead.
And that's for docks.
Correct.
Thank you. Mrs. Uscandies, follow-up? Okay, your hand's still up. Thank you. Moving on.
The last section on page 36, on line 21, reinforces that the port director will take direction from the city manager or designee on all things related to cruise ship tourism. And that takes me to the end of the changes to this ordinance. I will note that Port Director Yucatel is on Zoom if you have questions for him as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions? And yes, and Chair Don Etheridge is in the audience as well. And Mr. Dooley from the Docks and Harbors Board. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there questions? Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I guess just to, again, kind of feeding onto this, who would be in charge of the thing. So if we were developing a port on the backside of Douglas, that would, with this ordinance, who would be dealing with that planning? The tourism manager?
Madam Manager.
So that's a pretty large project that would probably have all kinds of, master planning and behind it. But in so much as there was a nexus to tourism, the tourism manager would be involved, but really it's the manager's designee. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the tourism manager. We have a engineering department with lots of project managers. So I think really, when I think of developing a port, the backside of Douglas, I really think more about freight, which would, so something like that could be led probably by engineering or by Port and Harbor. Often, like from a logistical perspective, we do trade, sometimes engineering manages Port and Harbor projects, sometimes the port does. Obviously, the port manages them more frequently, but if there's capacity or expertise issues, those are shared between the two.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So right now, I think I asked the question, would we be doing this at any other time? If we didn't have all these questions, would we be moving in this direction? And the answer was maybe not. And so once we get, do we have an exit strategy or an end date? While we do very much have the need of moving this direction now, fast forward 10, 20 years, will it still be necessary? And how would we determine if it's still necessary to have a tourism director if, kind of all the issues are taken and I'm sorry, I think my question is there an exit strategy or an end date, or would there be something that would cause us to go away from what we're creating now?
Madam Manager.
It's a difficult question because it's forecasting a different assembly with a different budget reality, with a different community, perhaps. So I think that your question is, do we see this as a temporary clarification of roles and responsibilities? And I do not, because I see that the community of Juneau really struggling with managing tourism from a holistic perspective beyond the docks, which is, it's complex problem solving, right? We're trying to like manage human behavior where we don't have direct control by influencing all these various factors. I see that as an economic reality that this community will be dealing with for quite some time. I don't see like, I don't see I guess I would like to say I don't see cruise ships immediately deciding not to come to Juneau. Of course, we've all seen that within our time here. So anything could happen that would change our reality. And of course, budget will dictate also, our reality. So there's so many unknowns, but I do not see this as a temporary change, if that's your question.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My question is, with a decent reduction in responsibilities for docks and harbors, do you anticipate any change in their staff capacity, or staff having to be shuffled around, or maybe even laid off? Do you think this would be a big enough reduction in responsibility that it would make some staff not necessary?
Madam Manager.
No, I want to be clear here. This ordinance really is specific to the roles and responsibilities of the board and not really staff. Obviously, staff, has to implement the will of the board. But, Docks and Harbors spends a tremendous amount of time, managing the docks, security, operations. There's lots of operational duties for Docks and Harbors. There still would also be that project management responsibility. So, I don't see this as a shift in duties so much as, again, providing a seat at the table for that tourism perspective.
Madam Mayor, do you have a motion?
Yes, I do. First, I would like to ask all assembly liaisons to bring the proposed changes to the respective empowered boards for feedback. And I also want to ask Chair Etheridge, when's your next meeting? When's your next meeting? Next Thursday? No. This Thursday. 29th? 29th. Thank you. So those of you who want to go to their meeting, it's on the 29th. And then I would like to move Title III and Title 85 proposed changes in their ordinances to be introduced at the April 1st regular assembly meeting to give liaison time to collect relevant feedback.
Do you ask unanimous consent?
I do.
Mr. Smith and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. Just objecting for the purpose of a question. I think I get and I see why these changes are proposed in Title III and Title 85. I have just, and I have faith in staff and the board to kind of like figure out these differences. I mean, some of the questions raised in the docks and harbors board letter seem valid. And I guess I just want to confirm with you, are you I just want to make sure that we're not going to put this into play and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of things that are dumped in the manager and the tourism manager's lap. Like, how are we going to make sure that those things kind of get smoothed out, or are there kind of chains of command that would prevent that from happening?
Madam Manager.
So I think that as far as workload is concerned, Docks and Harbors staff would still have a very pivotal role in all the managing of both projects and Docks and Harbors. And it's a very professionally run department, so I feel like they could still maintain those duties and that expectation. Change in the ordinance to have the port director report to the manager for tourism-related activities also helps with that chain.
Mr. Smith, have you removed your objection?
Can I have a follow-up really quick?
Yes. And
So-
then Ms. Wall.
In the first page of the Docks and Harbors Board letter, they say Docks and Harbors expend significant resources managing downtown and Statter Harbor parking lots, as well as deconflicting tour excursions from local users of Statter Harbor, North Douglas Boat Launch, and Wayside Park Float. Those are not things that you're expecting to have to take on,
Madam
for
Manager.
example.
No, but but I do expect that the tourism manager and the manager's office to have influence in how managing the impact of tours is handled, for example.
Very good. Okay, again, I have faith that I think you and the Docks
Madam Chair, your feed is skipping for everybody on Zoom, FYI. I don't know if you are unable to hear us let's see. No, it is not my connection. It is everybody who's watching online. So it's for attendees as well. Or not just panelists, but people watching at home. It ditched us. It ditched us, you guys.
That we might move it to adjust this and
Looks like they were frozen, hey?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wasn't still narrating. I was texting with Robert Barr. So they're taking an at ease to figure it out. After I said, it's not me, it's you. Since my internet is a little slower than your guys, or it's like doing the delay. Anyway. The first one I thought I was losing it because I was like, no, they're blinking in real time. Like everybody here looks good. But anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, it's when Katie cut out the first time, huh? She was
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah. And especially because now it seems like people were objecting and I really want to hear those comments. Anyway.
She's on cell, but.
We can hear you now, Beth.
Okay, so we just lost all internet connectivity with the machine that runs the tech. And so we're going to pivot and we are going to disconnect the Zoom. We're going to move everybody upstairs into the conference room and reconnect Zoom in about 5 minutes. If everybody could go ahead and reconvene in about 5 minutes, we hope we will have new connectivity in an alternative venue.
Okay.
So sorry about that, everybody.
No, thank you so much.
How do we tell the people that we're connecting to?
Okay, so for all of you who are on Zoom, if you could reconvene in approximately 5 minutes, we will reconnect from the other room. Thank you very much, and we're sorry for this technical issues.